Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi. Now in a recent video I showed you how to reattach the arms to a vintage large 12 or 14 inch Kenner Darth Vader, as you can see here. These are two figures that I have in my collection and both of them had their arms missing, so go and check that video out if you have a Darth Vader with detached arms. But while doing that, a few people said to me, why don't I work out a way to make a cape, because both of my figures were missing capes. So here on the right you can see a cape that I've made for this Darth Vader.
Impressive.
Now this is not the easiest of things to make, so this is going to be quite a complicated fix-it guide, because there's an awful lot of sewing and a lot of fiddly bits to do to make it, but it really is worthwhile. As you can see, Vader is looking pretty good now. Now I have to say a big thank you to Martin Loy, who's one of my subscribers on the channel, who sent me some great images of an original cape, and from that I was able to take that into Photoshop and make this very, very large pattern, as you can see here. Now you can get this from toy-polloi.com and you'll need to print it out onto a few bits of paper and then stick it together, because it's too big to fit onto one A4 sheet. In fact, this is 4 separate sheets of paper that I've stuck together to make it, because it is so large. If I had a bigger printer I might have been able to print this out, but as it stands my printer only prints at A4. And as you can see now, this guide has 2 sets of lines around the edge, and the reason for this is because the original cape had a hem all the way around it. So what you have to do is we're going to have to cut out the fabric to this outer shape and then fold this edge over and sew it all the way around. So as I say, this is quite a laborious job and does take quite a while to do. I will show you at the end of this video how to make a simpler cape, but if you want to make one that looks like the original, you will need to go through this whole process. So here you can see my prototype cape. Now this is the one I made to test that everything worked properly and that the cape was the right size, and that everything I'm going to show you should be easily done by most people. You will need some basic sewing skills, but even I can do this. I'm not a great sewer, but as you can see, it looks pretty good.
Obi-Wan has taught you well.
To make this cape something that everybody can reproduce, I'm going to be making it out of things that you can easily buy. So the main bit of fabric for the cape is actually a t-shirt. Now as you can see here, I've picked this t-shirt up off eBay. It's a brand new t-shirt. I bought an extra large one just to make sure that there's a lot of fabric, and this cost me all of £2.50 I think, even including postage. So not a great deal of money, and from this I should be able to make 2 capes. I might even be able to make more depending on how large this extra large t-shirt is. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay this out flat, and I'm going to cut off a panel off the front of this t-shirt so that it's nice and easy to work with, and then we're going to attach the pattern to it with some pins so that we can cut around it. So first thing I'm going to do is just cut the front off this t-shirt so we have a nice flat bit of fabric. So I've now cut off the front panel, it's just nice and flat here on my desk, and I've placed the pattern over it so that it fits neatly. And what we're going to do is we're going to pin this pattern in place before we cut the material out. So I've just got a load of pins here, and I'm going to work my way around the edge and pin the pattern so that it's nice and flat. This takes a little while to do. It's easier to do off camera, as everything is easier to do off camera, but we've just got to pin this so that it's nice and lined up before we go ahead and cut around it. So I'm just going to get this all pinned down and we can then start cutting the material. Now that everything is pinned, I can go ahead and cut the pattern out. I've made sure that the fabric is as flat as can be so that the pattern will be as perfect as can be when we come to cut it. This is always easier to do, again, away from the camera. At the moment I'm now leaning over the camera to do this cutting, but I should be able to do it well enough. I've now cut round the whole shape so we can remove the pins and take the pattern off, because we no longer need that. We'll be just working on the fabric. And so what we're left with is a perfect cape shape, which we now need to sew. Now this is where it starts to get a little bit more complicated. What we've got to do is sew a hem along all of the edges of this cape, and that's why there's an extra 5mm on the pattern. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start with this long flat edge on the side, because it's a nice straight line. The curve is a little bit more complicated, and I'm going to carefully fold over about 5mm of the fabric, and then I'm going to just use some pins to pin this in place before we sew it. So it's 5mm turned over and then pin it, and we'll pin that all the way along before we even start the sewing. Now I've just pinned along one edge of the cape. Some people would pin it all the way around, but I like to just do one edge at a time. I find that's the easiest way for me to deal with the sewing, but I'm sure a more competent sewer would probably pin the whole thing. So let's get on with the sewing.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Now I would class my sewing skills as pretty basic, but they should still be enough to do what I need to do on here. I've just got to sew along the entire hem of this side of the cape, and then do the same all the way around the cape. So what I'm going to do is just do a quick sort of in and out stitch. I have no idea what this stitch is called. I'm sure there are people out there who would know exactly what that is called. And I'm going to work my way along and remove the pins as I get to them until I've sewn this hem. It may be that a more experienced sewer could actually use a sewing machine to do this, and it would take a few minutes. I'm not good enough with a sewing machine to even start to try doing this, but I'm sure someone could. And if you do have a go and make your own, then do let me know and send me some pictures of the capes that you make, if they're hand sewn or sewn with a sewing machine. That's the first long straight edge done. As you can see, that's not too bad. My sewing is not perfect, but it's certainly acceptable for this cape. It would be nicer if it was a bit neater, but I really don't have the skills to do it much neater than that. But I'm pretty happy with how that looks. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the other straight edge on the other side of the cape before dealing with the neck and the bottom edge of it. So I'll get that second side sewn and then we'll come on to the neck. Now for the neck area, you need to again fold it over so that you get a little hem, but you may need to trim off a little bit of the fabric. As you can see here where I've cut, my fabric is not quite as precise as I would have liked, so there's a little sort of tab sticking out. So I'm just going to carefully snip that back, and then when we sew it down it should end up with a nice straight edge. It all depends on how neatly you can cut the fabric out. This fabric is a little bit stretchy, so I've ended up with just these two little sticky out bits, but that's fine. Little modification along the way is nothing to worry about. So I can now go ahead again. I've got another bit of cotton here and I'm just going to sew around this neck hole. Again, same sort of stitches all the way around, and then we can move on to doing the bottom hem of the cape. And here we have the finished neckline. As you can see, it's a fairly good curve, and that should fit quite nicely around Darth Vader's neck. So the last thing to do is the bottom hem, as you can see here. So I've already pinned this. This is the longest bit of sewing to do. So far it's taken me about 20 minutes to sew around the top section. I know I would have thought it would take me 10 or so minutes just to do this bottom edge. But once that's done, that's all of the sort of hard bits of sewing done. We can then just go ahead and add the cord for the bit to tie it around Vader's neck. So we'll get this last little bit sewn now. And here we go, that's all of the hems done. It's taken me about 40 minutes to sew them all, and I'm pretty pleased with how they've come out. The overall look of them is very good, and I think that should be good enough to work as a final cape.
The Emperor does not share your optimistic appraisal of the situation.
For the cord that goes around the neck of Vader, the easiest thing I've found to use is actually a shoelace. I've picked these two shoelaces up, again off eBay. The pair cost £1.50, so including the price of the t-shirt this has only cost £4. And these are very nice. They're pretty good sort of quality material and should look pretty good when it's sewn onto the top of the cape. They're also really long, so we've got plenty of cord to spare and shouldn't have a problem if we go wrong. To attach this cord, what we're going to do is I've just taken one end of the shoelace, because we only need, it's about sort of 4 or 5 inches worth of the shoelace sticking off to the side. And here is the cape. Now this is the back side of the cape. So this is the inside, the bit that will be hidden by Vader's neck, and what we're going to do is this outer layer we're going to sort of carefully put around the shoelace like so, just get it roughly in position, and then I'm going to carefully sew the shoelace on to the sort of inside of the cape. So again, we don't actually need to pin this because it should just be a pretty easy job to do. I'm just going to push the needle through and work my way around the top edge of the cape, and we'll sew that on. Just put a couple of little holding stitches in this end just to hold it in place, and then we can move all the way along. Right, that's the first one in, and we can just move our way along the length of the shoelace. As you can see, the shoelace is now attached to the top edge of the cape, and what we can do is just trim these down. The original ones are about 6 inches long, but I actually feel those are a little bit too long, so I'm just going to chop them about here just with a pair of scissors, about that length. Now, because these will come undone, I'm actually just going to put a couple of stitches in the end of those just to keep the ends together so they stop fraying. As you can see, there's a white inner in there as well, which I may colour black with a marker pen just to make them look a little bit less obvious. And here's the final cape. As you can see, I've just tied a little bit of cotton around the end of that. I've actually dropped a bit of glue on it as well just to stick it, and then a little bit of marker pen just to colour the inside of the thread. So I think this is the cape all finished. Let's put it onto my Darth Vader figure. And here we have the finished cape. As you can see, it's the one on the right hand side. The fabric is actually a lot better than the one I'd used on my prototype version here. I used an old t-shirt on my prototype and it was a little bit thick. The cheaper one that I bought off eBay is a lot more fine. The sort of threading of the material is a lot finer, and so it hangs a lot nicer and looks a lot more like the original. The cord also works really well. That's a nice idea just to use a shoelace. So in total, the cape has cost £4. That was £2.50 for the t-shirt and £1.50 for the shoelaces off eBay. You probably can get them cheaper, but I thought that was still a pretty cheap way of getting them, and it's taken me about an hour to make the cape. So not the quickest thing to make, but it's certainly worthwhile.
The circle is now complete. When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master.
So as I said at the start of the video, this is the more complicated way of making the cape. Let's have a look at how we can make a simpler version for those of you who don't want to go and do all of the sewing that's involved to make the cape that we have here. So now for the simpler version of the cape. As you can see here, I have the same pattern that we've used earlier, but I've now cut off the hem sort of 5mm edging that was around the edge of this pattern. So we just have the full shape of the cape without that hem. And on the other side of this, I have stuck some double-sided tape, as you can see here. So what we're going to do is we're going to stick this pattern onto another piece of the fabric taken from the t-shirt, and the reason I've used double-sided tape is so that this will stick sort of very loosely to the fabric, and it means that we can cut a really nice sharp edge around the edge of this pattern. If we just were to pin it, you sometimes tend to get little snags along the way, but by using double-sided tape it should mean that we can get a pretty even and nice cut to it. So you can see I've now stuck that onto another piece of the t-shirt, so it's now just time for me to cut this out, and I want to do this as neat as possible because obviously we're not going to be able to hide any of the edge with a sewn hem. The edge that we cut is the edge that we're going to have on the cape. So let's get this cutting and we'll see what we end up with. So there we have it. I've now cut around the pattern, and all that's left to do is to carefully take the pattern off. Because I've double-sided taped this, you have to just sort of pick a little corner and gently put it off, and we should have a pretty good cape shape there. Now the problem with not doing the hem is that the edges on this are liable to curl over a bit. If I just lay this flat, you'll see that the bottom is already curling a little bit. That's what the hem is there for, is to keep this all straight. So as I say, this is not going to be as good as the cape with the sewn edges, but it should look pretty reasonable. So the next thing we need to do is actually do the similar job as we did on the last one and sew on the cord for the neck. There's no way of getting away from not sewing this, so I'm going to sew this on exactly the same way as I did the last one, and then we can sort of cut the ends. We'll finish the ends off, and that's this cape done. So it is a lot simpler, but it is certainly not as good as the fully sewn one.
The Emperor is not as forgiving as I am.
So here you can see that I've sewn on the shoelace as before, and I've also finished the ends just by tying them off and a bit of glue and a bit of marker pen. The cape, certainly it will look all right when it's on the figure, but it's nowhere near as good as the one that I spent a lot of time on. This has taken 5 minutes, the other one took 40 minutes, and I think you can certainly tell the difference. So let's put this on the figure and we'll see what it looks like. Here are the two final Vaders. On the right we have the one that took me 40 minutes to make, and on the left we have the one that took 5 minutes to make. As you can see, this left side one, because it doesn't have a hem, the corners and bits are sort of curling up, and it's not hanging so nicely. So really you can see the difference in the two, that this one, it looks okay from a distance, I'm sure it would do fine, but really the one with these sewn hems hangs a lot nicer and is a lot more like the original cape would be. Obviously this one takes a little bit more time and effort, and it requires a little bit more sewing, but I think it's really worth the effort to put in that much more work to get it to look like this. This one is okay, but it really doesn't do the job for me. It's just a little bit of a sort of half-hearted effort, and it's not going to be in my display. I'm going to keep this one because it just looks an awful lot better. So I hope this video has been of interest to you, and thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter and Facebook.
Hello and welcome to the secret bonus bit of this video. Well done for watching past the end roll of my normal videos. So we're going to show you one more thing that you can do on Darth Vader. Now, a lot of times when you pick up these Darth Vaders, the legs are really very floppy. The joints on them tend to get very loose, and sometimes you'll find it hard to even stand this guy up because his legs are so floppy. So what we're going to do is tighten the legs. And the trick for doing this is you're going to need some shearing elastic. This is very cheap, sort of thin elastic. It costs, I think this whole reel costs 99p, and there's 10 or 20 meters on here. There's a lot of stuff anyway. So we're just going to cut off a length of this elastic. Doesn't need to be massively long, just cut through that there. And now I'm going to hold one end and I'm going to carefully wrap this elastic into the joint of the leg. So you can see I can pull this round and through, and then just keep wrapping it around the joint of the leg. And you go round a few times, rotate the leg a little bit just to give it some sort of, loosen it up a bit and let the elastic go in. Keep wrapping it round. We keep going. Now hopefully that's started to get a bit stiffer, which it has. So what I can do now is I'm just going to take the two ends of the elastic and I'm going to tie a knot. You should be able to tie that knot and hide it inside the gap of the legs. I'll do one more knot there just to make sure it's super sort of tied, like so. And as you can see then it breaks, and that's what you want. It's now broken and hidden itself in the gap. I can just, there's a little bit there, just trim that bit off, and you'll see now that this leg is really quite stiff and stays in place, whereas this leg is still loose. So there you go, a simple little fix to make Darth Vader's legs not so loose and floppy and make him stand up. That's the secret bonus bit of this video. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter and Facebook.